So let's kick off so we can properly use this full hour. My name is Matias Barberis. I'm the coordinator of the Future Resilience Project and a researcher at Epicenter. And I'm here today in this webinar with Kerstin Kulz from Fraunhofer EC, Loren Traksikowski, and I hope I pronounce it properly, from Aston University and member of the Ethics Board of the Future Resilience Project, and Christian Matti from the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. This will be our panelists, and I will take a few moments to introduce them properly in a second. I would like to invite everyone, if you have any comment or if you have any question, you can use the chat and the question and answer buttons. Probably there is in your top part of the Microsoft Teams webinar. And we will take on these questions after the 3 presentations. So for you to know, the agenda today will be a very brief introduction from my side, and then we will have these 3 introductions from Kerstin, Lorin, and Christian that will touch upon different methodologies to build societal resilience and different approaches. And then we will go to this question and answer session that will be around 20 minutes of discussion between everyone. Maybe just a few notes on the project. And I would like to say this is the first of several thematic webinars that we will organize between today and probably the end of this year and beginning of 2025. And these webinars are mainly oriented to people that is working on building societal resilience. We have at the core of the project 10 future resilience labs that I will introduce in 1 to 2 minutes. But this is also a good moment for everybody to discuss on different topics that has to do with how we build societal resilience in Europe, different methodologies, different approaches, but also different thematic expertise that could become relevant while thinking about resilience. So this first one will be about methodologies, but we are already having plans in our agenda to talk about disaster, to talk about migration, to talk about housing issues, health, digitalization, and so on and so forth. Different challenges that has to do with how we build and how we think our challenges today and how we build resilience based on these challenges. So about the project, just a few words for those that are newcomers, and this is the first time that you touch base with us. The project aims actually to strengthen the European economic and social resilience, and this is a project that it's a Horizon Europe funded. It's a 3 years project. We are now in the 2nd project, but it has a strong component of experimentation and working with different stakeholders, working with this Future Resilience Lab concept that we have developed, in which different stakeholders will sit together and will work on concrete challenges. And from these challenges, they will design strategies for building societal resilience in the long term. So these 10 labs were, some of them were part of the initial core team of the project, and 7 labs were selected through an open call last year. And these labs, you can see, they are coming from different parts of Europe, and they are working in very concrete topics. So you have here labs that are working on health issues, labs that are working on climate change, labs that are working on the governance of the urban planning, some others working on the labor market and skills, or on energy and transport. As you see, the diversity of topics is quite broad, and the idea is that we can think about resilience not in silos, but also how we can exchange between the different topics, understanding their specificities, but also what are the similarities and the common challenges that they are facing, and how they can actually build resilience at the more local and regional levels. I would like to say the project has a strong component of what we call evidence-informed policymaking. So all these 10 labs are working through, once they frame the challenges and they work with the scenarios development, and I think Kerstin will probably introduce a bit better about this. They go to design the policies, and the policies are based on actually previous existing knowledge that is available, funded through diverse type of research in Europe, but also different policy recommendations that were produced by international organizations. And it's all compiled in our knowledge base that we have developed during 2023. It's openly available on our website, and there is also guidelines on how to navigate, how to use it, what's the rationale we use for building this knowledge base. So we would like to also welcome you to start exploring this set of policy recommendations that are also organized in different thematic areas similar to the areas of the different labs that we have and beyond. And this is an important component because there is a lot of research that has been done in the last 10, 15, or even more years that has actually a lot of to do with the resilience. And we have taken care of really mapping all the projects and documents that has to do or has something to say, okay, what could be concrete actions or successful solutions that were actually tested in the society and could be used to create new policies or new policy mixes in terms of resilience. On top of that, we have also a future resilience toolbox, which is still not open, but will be openly available next year towards the end of the project. And our future resilience toolbox includes 3 different types of tools. One of them, of this set, is process tools, which is a sort of guidelines and supporting material to support a policy testing through participatory and multi-stakeholders future style dialogue, which is our section of how we come to this foresight and scenario development part of each of the labs. But we also have tools about policy, how to design appropriate policy mixes, and also different thematic tools that has to do with how we can better understand different challenges that we have today in the society. So we have tools that has to do, again, with housing, with disasters, with the governance in general. So to properly frame the different problems that we have. This toolbox, as I mentioned, will be open to everyone, and we are also collecting multiple innovative approaches that our labs are implementing in their projects, so they can enrich this toolbox, and at the end you will have a good combination of tools that you can use in the future for designing your participatory projects for building resilience. And I think also Christian will have something to say about how we can work on these participatory and co-creation formats. Last but not least, we have in our project a strong component of ethics. I think we understand that there is a very important aspect that needs to be taken into consideration while working on participatory projects, and especially when we are building resilience and involving different type of stakeholders. So Lauren will also give us an introduction to how we should mainstream ethics when we are thinking about crisis and resilience. So this will be a very brief introduction from my side, and I would straight away go to the first presentation. So I would like to welcome Kerstin. Kerstin is a scientific project manager at Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research. So Fraunhofer ESI, she's part of the core team of the Future Resilience Project. They are leading actually the work package on experimentation. She studied Japanology, Chinese studies, and economic and business administration, and now combines all this knowledge with different methods from foresight and future research and times research. She's also professor at the University of Heidelberg. So Kerstin, we would like to start with your presentation, and maybe I have a question for you to start. It's why do you think that the long term is so important? What do you think we can say? What is preparedness, and shall we all become preppers considering all the threats that we have right now, or what all this means? And maybe one last question for you is, why do you think it is important that we invest in the future?
Yes, hello everybody. Good morning. I hope you can see already the presentation. Does it work? Okay. I would like to go a little bit further back before I come back in my presentation to your questions. They are inherent. And as I'm the first presenter, I thought I would have the possibility to explain a little bit for those who are not so familiar with it, what foresight is, or futures research or perspectives. And it's a co-creative attempt. It's jointly looking into futures. It's structured. And we say foresight is the structured debate about complex and different futures. That means you cannot do it alone and you cannot prepare alone. Of course, you can prepare for yourself, but looking into the future means an active preparation for the future of different futures. It is long term, sometimes medium term, but you have to go back to the here and now and to the decision that are taken now. And now is the time to start to be prepared, I would rather say, not to prepare for something. We are not predicting the future, but we are assuming different things. So we have theses about the future and we think about how the future might unfold. And we have different futures. We often think, oh, there's only one future ahead, but that's not true. There are many different possible futures. There are likely and probable futures, and there are the futures we want to see. And often we just go to the futures we want to see and neglect what we do not want to see. But there is a lot to do also about futures that we do not want to see. So we work with self-fulfilling and self-destroying prophecies, both. But the major thing is for, especially in this project, to work with different possible futures. They are all somehow likely, they are all somehow possible, they are all somehow feasible. And that leads me to our major logo picture, which tells you there are different doors you can choose. But what we can do with a lot of foresight methodologies, especially with scenarios, to have a glance behind these doors, look at what might be there, and then decide for one of the doors in the end, or make things possible. In this project, we are more on the decision part and more on the preparation part. And that's why I looked back also to the notion of resilience. And I went back to the strategic foresight report of the European Commission. And in the 2020 report, that was clearly stated that for them, resilience is the ability not only to withstand and cope with challenges, but also to undergo transitions in a sustainable way, in a fair way, and in a democratic manner. And they also identified different dimensions, social and economic, green, digital, and geopolitical, and that are the ones you see on the agenda. Until now, we don't know after the elections how that might change, maybe even. And it also explains the context on the Commission agenda and the context of the transition-led Commission agenda, while of course maintaining the EU's core purposes and to integrate that. One of the key notions here is transformative resilience. So to be resilient, to be able to adapt, but also to change something in the direction of a kind of desirable future, or at least more desirable future than what we had. So that means in the projects, resilience means be able to cope with something on the one hand, but change it for the better for next time. And be prepared. Be also prepared in the long term. Don't forget your long-term transformation goals or where you head for. It is less a prepper. So don't stock everything. That does not make sense. And it's not getting better over time. So you cannot eat all the stuff you prepped for, even if you prep for a pandemic lockdown or whatever. So in the end, you have all that and you have to throw it away. That is not a good attitude. So what we are talking about here is more a kind of attitude to think on stock, to think in advance, to be prepared. And that's what we call preparedness. To have more than just plan A, plan B, plan C, but to be able and flexible to switch from plan A to plan D. There is no plan D on my slide. So be able to cope with something, be able to switch also your thinking and be flexible in your thinking. That can be trained. Many people are not. When they do foresight for the first time, it's something very strange for them to think ahead, to fix something that might be there in the future, and where to invest to in the future because it's not yet there. I only invest in something I know. But to think about things that are not there, but that are likely to come, helps us to make our decisions. Individually, of course, you can do your foresight on your own, but also as a society, and already divide a little bit of the roles that we have when something might happen. And we see it now, currently, when we have the floods in the south of Germany, that those people who are helping now, they thought ahead. There are some cities who are well prepared. They have walls, they have flexible walls, they bring it there. They have people who they can activate, who know what to do in case of. And that helped them to cope with these situations. And this is just going on currently. So this is really a recent example. And what you can do, and what we will also do in future resilience projects and in our pilot cases, is to make scenarios, to really build scenarios, create our own scenarios. And this is a picture from an old project, a post-COVID scenario project, where we had context scenarios and we built them during the lockdowns of the pandemic very early. And they are still valid. They can still help in imagining the context of our doing, of our thinking, of how the worlds might unfold. And they can be used as stress tests or for robustness tests of what we think we should do, we could do, or what we assume might lie ahead. That means thinking, stretching our brain towards different worlds and setting us into different situations, into different conditions, and testing then what we have already in mind, what our ideas are, helps us a lot in investing in something that we do not see yet, but that we see that we might expect it or we have to expect it. There are many things that we already know about the future. We don't know when they might occur, but we know that there is the high likelihood or the possibility that they might occur. And we can prevent some of them, we can adapt to some of them, and we can be able to cope with these situations. There are a lot of scenarios around. We will do our own scenarios with our own pilot cases, but of course there are these ones, there are the JRC reference scenarios. There are a lot of scenarios that are ready-made that you can use, but the best way of making use of scenarios is doing them, building them on your own, then they are your context. And they are framed to your situation and your questions and what you are expecting. That means this is the situation where you can figure yourself into a world that might change and that will change, because business as usual is no possibility. Business as usual will break, will always break. And we don't have any business as usual scenario not in these nor in the other ones. Yeah, and other questions can come later. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Kerstin. I think that was a quite interesting presentation, especially the example of the COVID, and I think that could be quite valuable for all the audience, and especially for the labs that they are coming to the phase in which they are going to start building the scenarios. I would like now to introduce Lorraine Draxikowski, who is a senior lecturer in law and ethics and the lead for external engagement for the Aston University Crisis Management Center, and also acting chair of her college research ethics committee. I would like to say she received her PhD, the ethics of natural disaster intervention, from the University of Birmingham. And her broad areas of research are disaster ethics and pedagogy, and particularly playful learning. And Lorraine, the questions for you would be, for your presentation, what should an individual do if they think that they have done something unethical or fallen full of potential guidelines for ethics?
Sorry, I realized I didn't unmute myself. Thank you very much, Matthias. So the first thing I would say is don't panic. It's going to happen. The most important thing you can do is recognize that it's happened. This shows that you're reflective, that you're trying to be ethical. Half the battle is already won, the fact that you're identifying these things. If you think that something has happened unethical, talk to Matthias or your mentors, or you can come right to the board if you wanted to. If you wanted to have those like kind of conversations directly with us, we're happy to have them. We're going to assuage worry, and we're just going to try to fix the problem with you. Again, identifying it shows transparency, and that's a big part of being ethical in this kind of research. It also shows the importance of keeping a journal. So part of the ethics guidelines is keep a journal and see what's going on. Good and bad. If you're proud of something that you've done ethical, write it down. Keep the notes of that, and you can show the transformation of your ethical journey, but you're also showing, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. And you'll see why that matters when I get to the end of my presentation. Hiding the issue is the worst thing that you can do. It will come out and you will suffer for it. Either you're putting people in danger, or your professional or institutional reputation will be questioned as a result. You don't want to do that. Now, one of the things that Kirsten said was be prepared. Couldn't agree more from an ethical perspective. If you're prepared, you give yourself the best opportunity to be ethical. So please think ethically throughout everything. And I'm just going to go through this presentation and give you just the basics, the guidelines on this. So that's the European Commission says that there's 3 ethics issues that you have to think about for projects like this: collection and use of administrative personal data, the involvement of different stakeholders. It's about the individuals. When people are involved, you'll see in your checklist, when people are involved, we have to go through ethical guidelines. We have to think about how this is going to affect people. Even if it's in a good way, we have to make sure that we're not exploiting vulnerabilities or just not thinking about people's autonomy to make decisions. And then the third thing that they give is activities in non-EU countries. Now, with the collection and use of administrative personal data, I got a little graphic going on here, you're going to have to think about GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulations. I gave you the website for it. If you're not already familiar, have a gander, have a look. Personal data, data processing, data subject, what all these terms actually mean from a GDPR perspective. And then this guidance will also tell you like the actual laws that you need to follow. But please remember that being ethical is not just following the law. A lot of times we have to realize that ethics leads and the law follows. And so even if you've ticked all the boxes for being legal, it doesn't mean that you've actually understood like the spirit of that law and what the ethics are underneath things. So that's why it's important to think ethically. And again, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail. When we talk about involvement of different stakeholders, this is why you have different information sheets, and you're getting the voluntary consent of your participants. Now, I know that when you're involving participants, you're going to have them sign off once, right? There's nothing to stop you, and I would highly encourage you to just remind people that, hey, this is the information that we gave you. You signed a consent form, but remember, if you have questions, if you want to withdraw, you're absolutely able to do that. You have to give people this ability to consent, and so to make their autonomous decision making. People have autonomy. They can make choices for themselves. And anything that you do that in any way undermines that, you're not being ethical. So just remind them. I'm not asking for, further signatures or, further paperwork, but if you remember that and they remember that, the spirit of the project is so much more ethical. And I think that it'll just become so much more cohesive, and people will be better able to understand what you're doing with their data and why they're contributing, and therefore be better participants in a way. I don't want to say that being more ethical makes them better participants, but I think that your project will run more smoothly if there's a transparency, trust, honesty, and things like that. Those are all ethical principles. The last thing is activities in non-EU countries. Now, I know only a couple of the labs are going to be working with non-EU countries. So in addition to GDPR, just have a look at what the local or national data protection rules are. They will most likely be very, very similar, if not exactly the same as those that govern EU countries. But you should be aware of them, because even though you're operating in an EU country, you do also have to adhere to the data protection rules and regulations in the countries that your participants will come from. I can't say anything about legally what you have to do, but you're going to want to do that, because there's going to be an expectation from the participants that what they know as data protection is going to be honored. So have a look at that. If there's problems in any way, be in touch with us. Let us know how you're managing it. Write it down in your journal. Do all these things that just show that you're thinking about it, that you're working things through. Additional resources, if all of the guidance that we've already given you, so you have the lab's ethics guidelines. Radix Online it stands for Radical Interpretation of Disasters, and there's disaster research ethics guidance and documentation and agreements from the international community on how you do research in disaster situations. Now, I know that you're not going to be going into disasters to do research, like at the front line, but it wouldn't hurt to look at how we understand vulnerable groups in post-disaster situations and things like that. So it's just another resource depending on your research. The other thing is Disasters, Core Concepts and Ethical Theories, giving you the link there in the slides. It's a big book, but it gives different guidance on different kinds of concepts, different kinds of disasters. And I highly recommend this book as well. Two of us, my colleague Ron, who's on the ethics board, said, "Oh, you should include that." And I went, "Oh, of course." It's a really, really good source for you to look at if you're interested in learning more from an academic perspective. Now, the thing to think about as we go through all of this, and I said, look, you have to go through all the regulations, you have to go through those 3 ethics issues from the European Commission. But the thing that I would also say to you, just on a day-to-day basis, is keep thinking about these 2 questions as you go through your projects. Did I help the most people? Now, this adheres to what we call a consequentialist or utilitarian perspective, maximizing good and maximizing utility. So if you want to take that perspective, did I actually help these people? Did I help the most people? I don't need answers to these questions, but if you understand that that's one of your ways of thinking through situations, then you're going to have a better chance of making ethical decisions. Write these things down. Document how you're understanding this process. Again, it's a good thing to write down. I'm not just asking you to document where you've done bad things. If nothing else, ethics has to be a conversation, because circumstances alter cases. And so your individual circumstances, there's nuance in all of that. Don't think that we don't know that. Don't think that we'll go, "Oh, well, you're unethical." All these nuances really matter. Write them down. Think about them. If you're struggling through anything, talk to us. Let's talk through that nuance. And so you can think about, did I actually help the most people? The other question to think about, either with the first question or on its own, is, did I do my duty for those that I helped? Did I act on some sort of responsibility? Now, one of the words that I used at the beginning was autonomous decision-making of your participants, right? So ethics, part of ethics, it's a deontological perspective of ethics, says that we have a duty, we have a responsibility to respect the inherent worth of all humans. And so if you have participants, yeah, you have this duty to do it to everybody around you, respect their moral worth, respect their dignity, respect their autonomy, ability to make choices for themselves. But when they're in a research situation, you almost have an enhanced responsibility, a very, very specific responsibility to those people. And did I always adhere to that? Did I always think about my duty and act on what I thought was my responsibility to those people and recognize their inherent moral worth, that they matter because they're human? So just some things to think about, even if that's like what runs through your head as you're making decisions. It might be an easier way for you to just think through every day and maybe either calm some worries or help you go, oh, I have adhered to all of these things. I did think about duty, and it's a good way to keep track of things in your journal. So that is my presentation, and I look forward to answering some questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Laureen. That was quite a clear presentation. I have to say just a few words is ethic matters. And just picking up a bit with the Kirsten presentation, we may have a plan A in terms of ethics, but during the implementation, there may be plan B, C. We need to be flexible, and we need to keep track of all these emerging ethics issues along the process.
Thank you.
So I would go to the last presentation that will be made by Christian Martin. Christian is a policy analyst at the European Commission Joint Research Center, focusing on foresight, design for policy. He's a sustainability and innovation policy expert with more than 20 years of experience committed to enabling science, policy, and practice interfaces to design and implement territorial development strategies in multi-stakeholders settings. And his presentation today will be about co-creation for policy, and he will bring us some insights on enabling actionable knowledge for transformative change. So my question for you, Christian, would be, what are the conditions and possibilities to enable an output-oriented co-creation processes, and how can we put together a set of multi-actor competencies to move forward with this?
Thank you, Matthias. I'm very happy to be here sharing some insights about what we have learned over a couple of years already, working on trying to understand actionable knowledge and trying to get something out of co-creation process, also in foresight process. Currently working in both in foresight and also innovation policy in order to contribute to this co-creation process with regions, cities, and member states. And what I'm going to share with you is some insights about what we have learned in both, in co-creation in general and policy process, but also in the context of foresight. So this is somehow the inspiration of this presentation about how we can deal with this knowledge gap about how governments and societies and other systemic actors can work together to guarantee or to work towards sustainability. The main starting point that we can have in order to understand this is how we understand the challenge that we have ahead. So now there are a lot of concepts, especially now one Industry 5.0 and human-centered approach that start with human, and we need to start to see the layers and the interconnections. Every system starts with human, and when we think about an organization, we can have a work unit, an organization, and the industry. But the reality is that there are other industries in our systems, and that's the way that we can think about sustainability, about interconnected systems. But there is also some conditions that we need to understand: infrastructure, markets and finance, and policy and landscape. When we are trying to work on transformative change and co-create with all the actors, we really need to deal with all these aspects as part of several ideas and principles in order to guarantee that kind of tangible outcomes. What we have learned, and we will see a couple of examples now, about what we can do in order to guarantee that kind of output-oriented co-creation process is that, first of all, we need to make sense of the challenge that we have ahead. There is a bubble sometimes about doing system mapping or ideation without a clear challenge, and the result is just like popping up some new ideas. That is good, but when there is no directionality or a challenge, it's very difficult to get something out of that process that can be useful. So having a sense making, a purpose-oriented logic is very useful for co-creation and set actually the basis for moving forward with something concrete. Then obviously you you co-create knowledge with expert and not expert knowledge, and you need to be inclusive and representative about different actors bringing ideas. This prototyping at the end needs to be useful for making decisions in terms of tangible and intangible outcomes. What do we do with these ideas, these interventions that we want to put forward? That is actually part of the quality of the process. Guarantee that these kind of elements are going to take forward for a smarter conversation later on and take decisions. How does it look in practice? Well, this is just a summary extracted from the handbook that we have created, the JRC and different institutions from the EIT, the European Institute of Technology and Innovation, over the practice of doing co-creation in an innovation setting. There are several variables that we can take into account to do co-creation, from the way that we are going to decide to support decision making, choices of methods and typology of participants in terms of the preparation. During the implementation of a co-creation process, it could be one, several workshops, it could be a flexible space, online, in person. Facilitation style could be more self-organization or very directive, as well as the actions after the co-creation or to capitalize that knowledge. What I'm trying to see with this figure is that anything could be adjust to the conditions. This is why we call this the tuner. You can actually adjust depending on the conditions. So there's no fixed recipes, but there are all these kind of elements that you need to take into consideration in order to make the co-creation process effective. So one special aspect of that we are going to see now is how you deal with that co-creation process. Especially when you consider all the aspects that the other speakers mentioned before about the inclusiveness, but also the understanding of new concepts and frameworks. So resilience, for example. So there is always a co-learning process in terms of the collaboration. And there are some roles in the different actors to broker that knowledge and make it happen. Sometimes you need to address powers differentials. An example, for example, during these weeks, I'm supporting a policy lab where 80% of the participants are researchers and only 20% are policymakers or SMEs. So how you rebalance the powers there? Well, you have different roles, okay? They are the challenge owners, the SMEs and the policymakers and the scientists and the academic people, and contributing with knowledge to that. The same in terms of how you set these kind of conditions. You co-design the tools. It's not plug and play. So you need to facilitate and, of course, have a tailored support to every specific condition. This kind of plug and play process and replication, it doesn't work. We really need to be sensitive about the context and the condition for every process. That's why we need to consider beyond the team. This is kind of a figure that illustrates the logic of co-creation. You can have a dream team with a technical officer, facilitator, workshop assistant, but the reality is that for co-creation, you work with a community. The community includes business, civil society, policy, universities, and even media that helps you to define the challenge, but also to communicate and produce knowledge. But as part of this European logic of collaboration, you work with a broader community in collaborations with other regions and cities. So the key question that I want to bring before bringing the example is that co-creation means that you need to identify functions, competence, and collaborative situations to make it happen in terms of transformative change. But also this kind of combination of functions, competence, and situations create this multi-actor agency, the capacity to act, to understand each other and take decisions as part of the value of the network that we are putting forward. This is my first example. This is a project that was trying to bring, as part of a portfolio of different projects, the understanding of a transformative theory of change to understand how we can work with different services and different actions all the time. And it combines the idea of innovation portfolio, how we co-create, but also how we bring transformative change from the innovation point of view. In theory, this is the framing. We all know that we have projects that are part of constellations of other projects that are connected to programs and sometimes are connected to strategies and to different elements like, for example, international cooperations or regulatory framework. This portfolio composition is very complex and we need to understand somehow what are the relations in order to navigate that. So framing is always very important. This is actually part of one of the lessons learned that we get harvest in the motion handbook. The result of this project is this kind of different theory of change, as you can see in a different ways, because it's tailor-made co-creation for each case. Susmo in mobility, Saturn on landscape, and act on NBS, that is on natural-based solutions. These three projects targets different sectors, but also with different actors. And this is something that I want to go in detail quickly. So this was the kind of the setting. The Climate Kick was the organization that was trying to bring this system in portfolio. The Motion Project tried to develop this theory of change. For who? For all these three projects. So there was this kind of constellation of workshops and of projects working together. But below or behind those projects, you have different understanding of trust, funding, corporations, and framework that made it happen. For who? For all these organizations, society, business, universities, and even 3 cities of each of the projects. This constellation of actions of actors is what I meant about different functions, competence, and responsibilities in order to make it happen. And during the co-creation process, you deliver handbooks, learning materials, but also you target new needs and agreement, you collect information and technical knowledge, and you facilitate the co-designs of these outputs. As part of that, you produce actionable knowledge. And this brings me to the last part of my presentation, how we understand actionable knowledge. Sometimes when we understand difficult topics as climate change, we need to make sense of several discussions: climate, industry, innovation, society, energy. And we use some framework like, for example, system innovation to put everything together. When we use this kind of framework, the idea is that we produce new knowledge that is actionable, that we can use to move forward as a kind of a prototype of an instrument, of a program, or a project. For what? For taking decisions. And this move forward with the innovation portfolio and the policy mix that is part of the context that started this sense-making exercise. So my second example, and I'm going to be quick on that, is on the strategic foresight report and how we deal with the challenge of understanding as part of a process social and economic sustainable Europe. So this is the process that we go. This is the framing that I said. We have scenarios that trigger the understanding of the future. We try to understand the change as part of transition pathways, and we understand current development right now that can give a hint about the future. This is the process. Again, workshop process, sense-making, co-creation, different steps, sense-making. So as you can see, this is a kind of a more a directed process because you want to have a specific output. And this is the result. Different areas of interventions in terms of a new social contract, governance for sustainability, people and economy, and global perspective. As part of that, we learn a lot about how the interventions can be used for shape, navigate, and orchestrate the futures in terms of the uncertainty and also the process and relations. But this is not what actually I want to share with you. It's how we use this. So this was used to trigger discussion at different levels. For example, at regional level, how these scenarios and how these interventions prepare somehow the regions to react to the future. If you can trigger new discussions and you can trigger new elements for prototyping actions, that's the point about creating actionable knowledge. The foresight process should trigger, as any other process like system mapping, a discussion that trigger the new interventions and the actions to move forward in the decision making. A second example is we use the same methodology but different scenarios at global level, collaborating with UNEP and bringing this idea about how we can work on sustainable transitions. The same logic of understanding the future, thinking about change, and trying to think interventions, was used in 6 workshops in different continents, actually. So the idea is that this kind of collaborations and this kind of settings allow us to have a global understanding of what do we mean about sustainability in different conditions. And last but not least, you can also create new scenarios. You can also create new realities as part of specific topics. And this is an example of how we use the same equation to gather 80 participants in 8 teams in Brussels to talk about the single market and industrial policy perspective. And as part of that, we create a new understanding of what does it mean, a single market for Europe and sustainability for the following years. Just to conclude my presentation, this is the material that I have presented, and this is part of all the methods and tools that you can take as a reference. And as again, it's not plug and play. You need to adapt to every situation. And my final conclusion is, yes, there are several advantages of undertaking co-creation process to address transformative change. And building this multi-actor agency in terms of the capacity of actors, everything together, is connected to this combination of competence and functions of all the actors as part of the network, the community, or the system where we are working on. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Christian. That was quite comprehensive, very interesting presentation. Just a heads up for our labs. Many of the material, but now we have some other interesting material to add. It's available on the toolbox because it's really valuable experiences in how to set up co-creation processes. So that would be up and available for everyone. So we have some minutes left before we close the webinar. So that would be the moment if there is any question from the public. I've seen that there is a bit of people connected. You can use the question and answer button or the chat for making your questions. Otherwise, I have. Oh well, there is one. So let's go with the people one. So Sophia from one of our labs is saying, in this process of co-designing the future to address future disasters and crises, how can we address people's fears and transform them into a proactive tool? There I would leave the freedom to any of our speakers to present. I know that Lauren has also a knowledge in terms of disaster research. So I don't know if you want also to start.
Yeah, I'll give a little. How can we address people's fears and transform them into a proactive tool? I go back to something I said in the presentation. It is about transparency and building trust. So if people are having doubts, having concerns, have you discussed with them why? Have you made all of your information accessible? Have you, when you make that accessible, are you making it accessible in a way that they can understand? So one of the things in the guidance is that the ethics forms is that it's in a language that they understand. Now that's our language, English, French, German, whatever, but it's also, can they actually understand the words that you're using? Before we got onto this call, I even had to ask Matthias, I don't know what those initials stand for, right? So it is about building trust, building a relationship, and then respecting their autonomy as you go through. I think that in disaster situations, there's also an issue of vulnerability, and then I don't want to say a minimization of autonomy, but your ability to make autonomous decisions is minimized because of the external vulnerability that's been created by socioeconomic factors and then the trigger event of the disaster. So transparency, building trust, really giving people information in a way that they can understand. I think that's going to be the first steps that I would say from an ethics perspective, as far as assuaging fears and helping people contribute in a really productive way.
May I also contribute? Because in the long term, you have different projections on futures, and they often evoke fears or anxieties. But the way you address these things and discuss them with different stakeholders, with different perspectives from different sides, and also take the big picture and put it into small pieces. that you can address, where you have agency, where you can do something about it. That already helps many people to lose their fears when they are part of the process, especially. And as being part of the process helps you then to address your fears much better, because then you notice that the future is not just hanging on me or just dropping down on me, but I am active, I can be active, at least I can do a bit. I can be prepared, I can help myself. And this gives confidence and reduces a lot of fears. That's what we notice in our co-creation processes in Foresight a lot, meanwhile.
I can contribute to this discussion. I think the point about fears is that how we unpack them. Something that I mentioned in the presentation is that framing is important. So how we define the challenge. Are we talking about weakness, opportunities, lack of resources? Is the fears to what? To any of those elements? Fears of not having the competence, the capacity. So if we can unpack the fears in terms of a framing that bring the right questions, we will have a challenge rather than a fear. And we can, with the challenge, we can work in terms of our projections about how we can work on that, what are the different governance and the capacities that we need to develop. I think it's important to bring them, but try to bring them in a kind of a constructive way. The same in terms of if we have different visions about the future. Some people can be fierce about it, afraid about the future, and others can be very positive. It's good to confront the ideas, but try to unpack that in terms of elements that everybody can understand: capacities, lack of resources, or limitations, weakness, and that makes the conversation more fluid and yeah, actually overcome the getting stuck in the fears.
Thank you. There is another question from Miriam, which is also part of one of our labs. Can you say something about the impact of societal conflicts and prejudices in these processes? How can they be bridged? It's a bit a more complicated question, so I give the floor. Any of you who wants to start?
Well, projecting some of these conflicts into the future gives you the opportunity to work out joint features, things that you can agree on. So if you are looking into the longer term or the medium term, it's not here. So the conflict is not yet here, but you can talk about it as a kind of imaginary at the beginning, as a kind of scenario at the beginning, and then many people who have very different opinions from really different actor perspectives can agree on things that they would not agree if it is on the things they are talking about for now, because currently they are often stuck in these discussions and they have always the same argument and they are confronting each others. But projecting it to a certain other point in time helps to again unpack the problem a little bit. And this is exactly what CoSite, one of the pilots, is trying to do a lot with their co-Saturdays on the one hand, and with parts in our project too, where they try to tackle, for example, integration topics, so really hot topics with a lot of social conflicts inherent.
If I can add on that, I think one, if we just zoom out from the question, we need to understand that when we run a co-creation process or a foresight process, we are trying to achieve a shared understanding of the challenge or the future that we are looking at. So something that we are going to deal with is that this kind of societal conflicts, the pre-existing or new ones, or also actually different understanding of the problems, is part of the pre-existing conditions. And the participatory process and the foresight is aimed actually to create this shared understanding. So the process itself is trying to create a shared understanding to deal with this kind of conflict of interest and dealing with that all over the process. Sometimes it's an issue about value, sometimes it's an issue about language, and sometimes you really need to provide the right type of conversation, not just a dialogue, but a more structured conversation to unpack the meaning of what is the conflict, okay? And understand that maybe it's an issue about understanding the causality, why this is a problem, or actually what is the consequence of the problem. When you see the different elements and you start to create this kind of shared understanding of the conflict of the problem, you are dealing with that as part of going forward to a kind of a more active type of logic or proactive type of logic to bring a kind of a more action-oriented perspective.
And I'll just weigh in at the end. I read somewhere recently, I wish I knew who said this, but you won't change people's minds by appealing to their ethics. And so take that or leave it. I'm not saying that as an ethicist. I'm saying that as a person who like has ethics everywhere around their world. And so I would echo what Christian and Kirsten are saying. I think it's really, really important to like come to people where they are. Christian also said something about what are the consequences that really nicely echoes the last point that I made in my slides, that what we can do is think about, did I maximize the benefit of the utility for the most amount of people? And did I respect the individuals in my project? So no one's opinion matters more than somebody else's. Bringing people, not necessarily from an equality, but an equity perspective. So it's about the equitable outcomes and understanding that if somebody is limited in how they are able to participate, or they're limited in how their voice has been heard in the past, well, then maybe you need to make some adjustments there so that we come to an equitable outcome. I think equity is always in disasters. I think that's the thing that's often overlooked in conflict and war. And it's about equity, not necessarily equality. And so I can't speak to bridging these problems, but what I can say is it's about respecting the individuals and thinking about equitable ways forward. Thanks.
Thank you all. I think for the time being, we will close the questions. And I would like just to wrap up saying a very big thank you to all the three speakers. Your presentations were actually quite important. I think also the last questions show that the people is engaging also on the topics. They are going quite in deep with the topics of the questions. Discussion is really open, and I would like at least to our labs to please keep engaging with your different mentors and discussing about all these topics, which are quite important for framing and also preparing the scenarios and then designing policy actions in the last phase of the implementation. And I would like to thank you also all the audience that is still connected despite this very productive hour of learning for all of us. And I would like to really welcome you to follow us on social media and check on our website. There will be more of these webinars in the second half of the year, starting from September. We are going to work on different topics, so stay tuned, and we hope to see you again in the next round of webinars. So thank you all. Have a very good rest of the day and week.